everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Xobin Talks. I'm your host Nikita, and today we are joined by a highly respected global HR leader, board advisor, and GCC strategist who has helped organizations build high-performing teams and lead large-scale business transformation initiatives across international markets. She brings a unique perspective on what it takes to build future-ready organizations. Please join me in welcoming Sangeeta to Xobin Talks. Hello, Sangeeta. It's wonderful to have you here with us today.
Hi, Nikita. Thank you so much for having me on Xobin Talks. I'm really honored to be here.
We are excited to learn from your experiences and insights. So, let's dive in. So, Sangeeta, you have had an extensive career across global HR leadership, transformation, and executive advisory roles. I would love to start at the beginning. How did your journey into HR begin? And what inspired you to build a career centered around people, leadership, and organizational success?
Honestly, I did not choose HR. HR chose me, and this was by process of elimination. Okay. So picture this. I mean, it's early 90s. I'm in my second year of postgrad. I have three subjects from which I need to choose one as a specialization. Numbers, never my love language in my school years. So finance, out. Okay. Sales and marketing was the one I wanted. But I grew up in a fairly conservative Indian family. So sales and marketing really meant, meetings that were going to happen at short notice, a lot of travel, which would be probably mostly solo and things like that. I really didn't need anyone to kind of tell me this out loud. I kind of knew that that was a door my family was not going to be happy for me to walk through. So I was left with HR, which, by the way, at that time, I had a very superficial understanding and I probably thought HR was, team picnics and payroll and things like that. Okay. But here's the thing that I did know about myself. I was this kid who in school got pulled into every playground fight, not to take a side, but to sort it out. And the thing is, I read rooms quickly. I like the messy, ambiguous, and very human bits about people interactions. And when I actually started out in HR, I realized pretty quickly, that those messy, ambiguous people interactions weren't really a side function. They were where, the business decisions were actually being made.
Absolutely.
And, that's what kept me here. I also had the fortune early on, of seeing HR at its best. Not in theory, but in the work of one of the most accomplished HR leaders Indian business has produced. I happen to work alongside Hema Ravichandar, former Infosys CHRO, and now one of the most respected board voices in Indian HR. And the way she held the people agenda at the same table as business strategy. And that kind of became for me the standard that I've kind of worked toward ever since.
That's fantastic. What particularly interesting is how HR has transformed alongside business itself. The function today looks very different, very different from what it did even a decade ago. So that's bring to my next question to you. Looking back at your experiences, how has the role of HR evolved over the years? And more importantly, what do you think separates great HR leaders from good HR leaders in today's business environment?
Hmm. The HR that I walked into in the early 90s and the HR I help boards understand today, definitely not the same job, as you rightly pointed out. They do share a name, but that's about it. Okay. The first version of HR was more about what I call, plumbing, right? Payroll, paperwork, operational basics. And then came, policies and, writing the rules and compliances and handbooks, etc. And then thereafter, 2010-ish, I think HR became something around, platform or a custodian. It became a function that holds the talent strategy for the entire organization. And right now, I think in 2026, we are sitting, I think, in the middle of something that some of the best minds are calling today the great reinvention of HR. And yes, I've heard the rhetoric around AI collapsing, 30% of headcount through AI agents, but it is also massively expanding the strategic mandate. And in my view, the function is, shrinking and growing at the same time. And there's something, worth flagging about why this conversation matters more right now than at any point in my, career, at least that I can think of. And I think that is, very simple. It's the cost of getting people decisions wrong that has become impossible to hide, whether that is through your attrition data, whether it is the missed quarters, or the conversations the board used to delegate. And which is why, the gap that you're talking about between good HR and great HR, I mean, I think that gap matters more than ever it has today. And that also brings me to your question. The second part of your question is, what separates great HR leaders from good ones? So I'll give you a couple of my thoughts. So this is by no way the only definition of great HR leaders, but based on my experience, couple of pointers, right? So I think good HR leaders, tend to optimize the org chart, whereas great HR leaders, they rewrite the P&L. You know, um, good HR, I think, knows the policy. Great HR, I think the leaders, they know which policy is silently bleeding the company, and also they have the spine to actually bin it by Friday. You know, the boards I sit on now, and the founders who ring me at 11 in the night, usually after a difficult conversation has gone sideways, they are not asking me for HR expertise. They are asking me for commercial judgment applied through a people lens. The great HR leaders, I think, do not sit on the people side of the table. My view, I think they sit on the business side, but they happen to bring the people lens.
You're absolutely right, Sangeeta. As business become increasingly strategic, we are also seeing organizations rethink how they structure their global operations, and that is where global capability center are playing a much larger role than before. So, my next question to you is: Global capability centers have evolved from cost efficiency hubs into strategic business centers that drive innovation, technology, and growth. However, many organizations are still beginning their GCC journey. From your experience, What do you think organizations often misunderstood when they begin building a GCC?
Hmm. Very interesting question. Especially because of the kind of work that I'm doing currently. My read is most organizations do not misunderstand the strategy of a GCC. I think what they misunderstand is the identity of one. And I'll explain this, right? So the GCCs have evolved from cost centers to strategic centers. We've all heard this line. It is true. It's also the version that everyone gets right. But there is a version that actually gets people into trouble, and that is a more subtle one. And just so that we kind of have a context around numbers, GCCs in India today, anywhere around 2000 plus GCCs, they employ roughly 2 million plus people, have a market of about 95 plus billion dollars this fiscal, and 500 of the global Fortune 2000 are already operating here. So the scale question, in my opinion, has already been solved. India can do scale. But what's not solved is the judgment question. Because, when most organizations start building a GCC, they think they're opening a center. What they're actually doing is exporting their headquarters' worst habits at a lower cost. Same meeting culture, same decision bottlenecks, same political shorthand, just that it is now having a 12-hour time difference. And then they're surprised, oh, why is the center not performing? According to me, I think the misunderstanding, Nikita, has two layers. First, I think they treat the GCC like a vendor. You know, the relationship is at arm's length, deliverable based, instead of treating it like a second home, right? And number two, they measure the center on cost in year one when they very well know that in year three, the center is going to be measured by the parent inevitably on capability. So, what happens here? The metric and the mandate are at war with each other, right? So, what I'd say, Nikita, to any leadership team about to start the journey, and this is really core to what we do at Professor, is that a GCC is not your regular service center that happens to be far away. It's actually a second headquarters that happens to be cheaper. And I've seen companies that, confuse this, actually spend the next decade wondering why their best people keep leaving.
That's a valuable insight, Sangeeta, because many organizations focus heavily on infrastructure and process during setup, but ultimately the success of any GCC comes down to the people leading and building it. And that is where many GCCs either accelerate their success or struggle to scale effectively. So, moving on to my next question. When setting up a GCC, what are the most critical hiring and leadership decisions that needs to be made during the first year?
Hmm. If I had to name just one decision, Nikita, I would say it's the country head. And that's the part I think most companies get wrong. And what they get wrong isn't the choice of the country head, but it's really, the sequence. Here's what I see, okay, again and again. A company decides to set up a GCC, lease an office, register the entity. They start interviewing all department heads, technology, finance, operations, you name it. And somewhere in month four, they realize, oh, we don't have a country head. And now the search becomes a panic. And panic hiring at that level is almost always a year three problem disguised as a saving of year one. You must be knowing this, Nikita. A serious country head search is at least 12 to 16 weeks, sometimes even longer,
Right.
right? Infrastructure follows leadership, it does not precede it. And the very best companies I've worked with hire the country head before they sign the lease. The under discussed mistake on the country head while we are on this topic, and I again see this also often, is hiring brilliant CTOs before the country head and then creating a power vacuum, right, on culture, on talent, on brand, stakeholder management, all of the things which a technically gifted leader is rarely set up to fill the shoes with. So the person also, I've seen another, trend that happens with GCCs, and that is over indexing brand name CVs. Now, what do I mean by that? The person who probably ran, let's say, a 5,000 person center at a very big company, famous company, is not necessarily the person who can build a 50-person center in a tier 3 city from scratch. It's different muscle, different sport. And, beyond the country head, the next hires matter almost as much. And I call this the first 10 rule. Why do I do that? Is because your first 10 leadership hires typically set the trajectory for the whole center. And not only do they set the trajectory, they set something very important, the culture. They set the decision quality. They set hiring credibility. Can these 10 bring in the next 100, right? They set the center's ability to earn an expanded mandate from the parent. And what I've seen is that data that is quite stark around this, because around three quarters of GCCs that struggle in years 3 to 5 typically trace the root cause back to, weak or delayed hires in months 1 to 12.
It's interesting how often we talk about talent acquisition and leadership structure, but culture is equally important. In many cases, culture becomes either a powerful accelerator or a major obstacle as organizations scale globally, right? So, this perfectly brings me to my next question. As organizations scale globally, culture becomes increasingly important. Yet, many HR leaders only start thinking about culture once problems begin to emerge. From your perspective, how can leaders build a strong culture from day one instead of trying to fix it later?
Hmm. I'm going to, take the liberty, Nikita, of pushing back on the question itself, if I may. Is that okay?
Yeah,
Okay. Most leaders ask it exactly the way you just did. How do we build a culture from day one? According to me, this very framing is part of the problem. Culture doesn't start on day one, it starts before. Because it gets built in everything a candidate sees and feels about the organization before they even accept the offer, right? Whether it's Glassdoor reviews, former employees, word of mouth. How did the recruiter speak? What was the tone of the recruiter? How quickly did the candidate get the offer? All of these, right? They are signals and signals of culture, right?
Absolutely.
But let me focus on three signals that I find most consequential. And the reason I'm saying most consequential is because I think they're the ones the leadership team directly influences, you know? So, the number one or the first one that I would like to talk about is the job description, right? As far as the job description is concerned, the words you use, what is it that you choose to advertise? What do you leave unsaid? It's not every time what you say, but also what you leave unsaid, right? Second, the selection process itself, right? Who's in the room? How do you treat your candidates? How fast do you give feedback? And something that is emerging off late, what is the quality of the feedback that we are giving? Because I think everybody in the candidate world is tired of those auto generated emails that say thank you very much, and you know the drift, right? And third, and most importantly, I think the country head's own hiring experience. Why does that matter? Because that becomes the template every subsequent hire feels in their very bones. By the time your second hire walks in, Nikita, the culture isn't being built anymore, it's being tested.
Correct.
Culture is not what you write on the wall. It is what your second hire is willing to put up with from your first hire. And this contract, trust me, gets written silently and usually invisibly. And you may ask me, what is it that enforces this contract? It is not the value statement, it's behavior. And behavior is set as much by what the founding team doesn't do as much as what they do. What are they tolerating? What do they reward? Are they avoiding difficult conversations? Even silence is a signal of culture. And very often, it's the loudest part of it. Yeah. Two failure modes that I see most often. First, imported culture. Parent company flies in for a town hall, 10 slides. This is who we are. Fly out. Tick. Culture has been set. It hasn't. A town hall is only an announcement. Culture is a practice. And, the second it is defaulted culture, silence in week one will become a habit in week six, will become the way things are around here by month six. And by month nine, you've got a culture you did not choose. You inherited that culture from whoever spoke the loudest in the first month. And the cost, Nikita, of getting the culture wrong is not abstract. Here's a painful number that should make every leader, and I think it does make every leader stay awake at night. And that is the voluntary attrition in India GCCs is around 16 to 20%. And if we look at the AI, ML, and the more engineering senior roles, it spikes 25 to 30%, right? And in India, 75% of attrition is voluntary. Versus, if you see a global average, it's about 50 to 60%. So, what's happening here? People are not being pushed out, they are walking out. And they're walking out on their own terms. And therefore, culture and not pay is the most common denominator in most cases. So, You may ask, okay, what actually works? And again, this is again the work we do quite a lot at Professor is to write down five non-negotiables before the first hire walks in. Not values, behaviors. Behaviors that are specific enough that you would actually let someone go for not complying with those behaviors. Simple example, right? Things like we disagree in the room, but not on WhatsApp afterwards. How powerful is that? Or we don't promote people who do not develop successors. I mean, that level of granularity and specificity is what is going to build cultures that last. Vague values will not scale. Specific behaviors can scale. And, the founders who typically call me are usually 6 months too late. They want a culture fix. But what they actually need is a culture audit. And we almost always find that the answer lies in week one and its activities and the calendar invites and who was there and who wasn't and what decisions were taken.
So I love that idea because culture isn't something that appears accidentally. It's intentionally created through leadership behaviors, hiring decisions, and everyday employee experiences. Now, alongside culture, we have also seen technology fundamentally reshape the workplace. So naturally, organizations need to think differently about workforce readiness. So keeping this in mind, here's my next question to you. With AI, automation, and changing workforce expectations reshaping the workplace, what skills and leadership capabilities do you believe organizations should be investing in today's to remain competitive tomorrow?
Uh, a lot of theatrical things that I've seen on the internet about the AI and the workforce and its impact. So I do believe there is some amount of theatrics involved in a lot of these trends and things that are being said. um, I believe that AI hasn't displaced jobs as much as it's displaced mediocrity. And the data from the World Economic Forum is actually quite reassuring. If you were to look at it, Nikita, around 170 million new roles were created, 92 million were displaced, and that leaves us with a net gain of 78 million global jobs by 2030. And within most companies, AI is, if you ask me, roughly 5 times more likely to shift responsibilities rather than displace people altogether. So, if you ask me, the challenge here for the leadership is not redundancy. According to me, it is redesign. And the risk that it is real, and there are some very sharp voices on this, particularly out of IBM's former HR leadership, is what's now being called a new, should I say, Frederick Winslow Taylor moment. The worry is that AI atomizes white collar work the way assembly line atomized manufacturing, breaks it into smaller, faster, more measurable pieces. And in the process, Nikita, AI strips the mastery out of it. That's the real leadership question. Not will AI take the job, but will what's left of the job be worth doing? And I'll be honest with you, there's a real conflict in this for me. For most of my career, the bias we've been managing is the human kind. right? Bias in who gets hired, bias in who gets heard in a meeting, bias in who gets a stretch assignment. I mean, AI is meant to neutralize some of that, but what it's actually doing in a lot of organizations is replacing human bias with algorithmic bias. And I don't yet fully know whether that's a better problem or a worse one. I have a hypothesis. I'm watching, the trends carefully, but I'm not going to pretend I've solved it. I don't think anyone has. So, given all of that, the redesign challenge, the mastery question, and the bias uncertainty I just walked through, there are three capabilities I'd be investing in right now, regardless, of how the bias question resolves itself. The first of all is sense making. The ability to read a room, a market, a model output, tell the difference between what is signal and what is noise. AI gives you more answers, but sense making tells you in the first place which questions should you ask AI, right, Nikita?
Right.
Second, reskilling at the team level, not the individual level. Because again, if I have to, look at the WEF projections, it is around 40% of skills that today are there in jobs will not be required in 2030, right? You
Right.
cannot manage that one person at a time. That scale has to be a team capability, and there has to be a leadership owner for that. And third, I think this is the one that most organizations underway on. And this is something that I call consequential courage. It is the willingness to make a call before the data is conclusive, because by the time it is conclusive, I think the moment is gone, right? AI does not reduce the need for judgment. It raises the price of bad judgment because everything happens faster, much faster than it used to happen. And this is the kind of conversation that I'm having on the boards I advise. What's our reskilling thesis? Is the CHRO, skilled enough to actually own it? Because if your CHRO is reporting via a COO, you've already answered that question, and the answer is no, right?
Right. Those insights are incredibly relevant for leaders navigating today's uncertainty. Sangeeta, while technology will continue evolving, building capable teams and strong leadership pipeline remains the heart of long-term organizational success. So, Sangeeta, before we move up into our, rapid fire round, I would love to bring everything together with our last question. For organizations planning to establish or expand a GCC, what are the key lessons you have learned that can help them build sustainable, high performing teams from the start?
Hmm. That indeed is a summary of our conversations, isn't it, Nikita? That's a really good
Right.
question. So I would say three things. Okay. One, slow at the top, fast at the base. Most GCCs get this exactly backwards. They panic hire the country head in month four and spend 2 years over engineering the funnel for the engineer hiring. And that is the wrong sequence. A great country head can absorb a fast hiring engine below them. A poor one, however, can't be saved even if there is a perfect hiring funnel for the entry level, right?
Right.
And two, make the mandate of the GCC center explicit and make it expandable, not very rigid. Because if you're signing up for a shared services mandate, but you intend that, by year 3, you want to do product engineering, say so on day one. Mandate creep in this case is a good thing because it means you're earning more responsibility. Mandate confusion, however, is fatal. People can grow into a stretching mandate, but they are definitely going to burn out if the mandate is moving and it's always moving, right? And number three, and this is, I would say, the most important, is treat the first 12 months like you're building a country team, not a back office. The single best leading indicator I found of a GCC's 5 year outcome is whether the parent CEO can name three people in the center other than the country head by month 9. If they can't, you've built a remote team, not a capability center. And what ties all of this together, and this is the pattern I have been seeing across all our engagements, even at Professor, whether it's the boards I sit on, whether it's the founders I coach, the cost of getting year one right is about a tenth of the cost of fixing year four. So, the question that I'd put to any leadership team planning a GCC is this: are you investing the first 10 weeks as if the next 10 years depend on them? Because they do. And actually, Nikita, if it's useful for your listeners, I have a diagnostic that I use with leadership teams setting up a GCC, and I'm happy to share it through LinkedIn for anyone who's listening and is in the middle of a GCC build right now. It walks through the sequencing, the critical decisions, and what top quartile builds do differently.
Fantastic insights, Sangeeta. You have shared a wealth of knowledge around leadership, talent strategy, culture, and GCC success. Now it's time for a fun segment that our audience always enjoy. Let's move into a rapid fire round. One simple rule, one word answer, or one liner answers only. Are you ready?
Yes, go ahead. I'll give it my best shot.
All right. One quality every modern HR leader must have:
Commercial instinct.
building talent internally or hire externally, which works better for GCCs.
I would say hire the first wave externally and every wave after that internally.
One mistake organizations make when scaling a GCC too quickly.
I would say headcount before headship, adding bodies before they've added the leader who can hold them all together is a big mistake.
What's more important, culture fit or culture add?
Culture add every time because fit is how you become a monoculture. Add is how you stay relevant.
That was wonderful, Sangeeta. Thank you so much for joining us today. Your insights on HR leadership, GCC strategy, culture building, and the future of work have been incredibly valuable. Before we wrap up, is there any advice you would like to give to our leaders building global teams today?
Like I said, hire for the company you'll be in 3 years, not the one you're today, because your future self is the one that's paying the salary.
Thank you once again, Sangeeta. It was truly a pleasure having you on Xobin Talks. And thank you everyone who tuned in today. If you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to follow Xobin Talks for more discussions with industry leaders, HR innovators, and business transformation experts who are shaping the future of work. Until next time, this is Nikita signing off.
Thank you, Nikita and Xobin Talks, for giving me this opportunity.